Okay, the recording has begun. Welcome to our third live call, everyone. I'm really happy to see you all here, and other people may be joining us a little bit later. Just a couple of logistics on the call. Just notice that it's the sound works best when we're all unmuting ourselves when we're not talking. Also, that can be assigned to whoever's facilitating, so that if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself, and if I'm paying attention or whoever is facilitating is paying attention, that can be like saying, I would like to say something. Yeah, go ahead and mute yourself if you're not wanting to talk. Unmute yourself if you would like to talk. You can also raise your hand if you want to say something so we can all see that. Someone asked, Nadia asked, does it unmute automatically when given the green light to talk? I have not experimented with giving people a green light to talk. I'm not sure how to do that. Sorry. So no, it doesn't unmute automatically. And we're using hand signals to say when we want to talk. I hope that answers your question, Nadia. Great. All right. So can everyone see the chat there where Nadia said, you know, hope you get better, Deborah? So if you would like to share a link or say something to everyone, you can type it in there. You can also, down at the bottom of the chat, if you want to type a message to an individual, you can click on the down arrow and that will send the chat to someone else who's on the call. Okay, and one last logistics piece is that I mentioned in an announcement that my longtime friend and mentor, Dominic Barter, had said that he would like to be on the call with us today. He often teaches in the live courses in Brazil that Gaia Education runs in Brazil and that local nonprofits, educational groups run in Brazil. The shorter version of this course, which is just usually a month long or so. And he said, I can't imagine doing it online, but I'll be there if I can. So if he can make the time, he will be on the call today. My last email from him said, okay. So I expect he'll join in when he can. And so if you have any questions, particularly about conflict or communication, he's your person. He's my go-to person about all things nonviolence. So without further ado, I'd like to invite everyone to say hello, let us hear your voice, and how about if we each share something, something that has brought us joy in the past week. So how about your name and something that has brought you joy in the past week? I'll give you a minute to think. Hi, Daria. We're just thinking of something that's brought us joy in the past week, and then we're going to each share. Okay. Does anyone feel like they would like to start? Just raise your hand and unmute yourself.
I can start. And so, hi, everybody. My name is Giovanni. I'm calling from the East Coast of the United States, near New York City. And one thing that's brought me joy, well, it always brings me joy, is to see my grandson go to his swim meets and swim as fast as he can. He's only 7 years old, but he relates as a seal. He thinks he's a seal. So that's wonderful to see. And the other thing that brought me a bit of hope was the results of our last elections here in the United States. A little bit of hope. I don't want to overstate it, but that's me. So thank you.
And how about after you introduce yourself, you invite the next speaker, someone else on your screen?
All right, well, I'll invite Morgan to share.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm from Midland, Ontario in Canada. I've been volunteering at the library recently, and we've been working on this makerspace project. So we recently just got our 3D printers in, so later on today I'll be assembling those, and I'm pretty excited about that. I think that's a fun project we're working on. So Anyone else? Laura L. Maybe pass it off to her.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Laura and I live in Italy, but right now I'm in Latvia, which is my home country. So I just came here yesterday evening. So that is something I'm very, very happy about because I'm visiting my family now, my cat and everything. And that is what is bringing joy in my life just right now. Okay, I'm gonna pass it to Martina.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm also calling from Italy. I'm actually in Italy now, not in Latvia, but I live in Italy and I'm calling from Italy. Yeah, what brought me joy? Today I went to pick up my tickets for my trip to Senegal. So it's really getting close now, so I'm excited about that. And what I'm really looking forward to is maybe to get the chance to work in a short eco-village training in Senegal, or participate and observe and learn from what they do there. So that's also something that I really got joy from hearing, that they are planning this training exactly when I'm there. So that's good. Thank you. So who could I pass on? Fan Lin.
Thank you, Martina. This is fun. Finally, I make it to my second live session. Last Saturday, I had a farewell meeting with almost a dozen long-time return members of a Chinese book club that I founded about a year ago. Because I am moving to an eco-village, so I hosted that farewell meeting with these old friends. So we had a wonderful gathering. During the meeting, someone was really inspired by how I organized the book club. So he suggested to the group that why don't we continue this group after Fan leaves the city. That really brought me joy because that tells that people really like that book club. Yeah, so that's what I would like to share with you. Thank you. So, Tim?
Hi there. Thank you, Fawn. This is Tim, and I'm talking to you from Chicago, Illinois, but I'm actually a resident of the state of Michigan, which is not too far from Chicago. And that's what brings me joy is that you may have heard of some of the problems that Michigan has been having with Flint's water crisis and stuff like that. There have been a lot of issues going on there. And last week, the state decided to put the leadership of the entire state over to women. So the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, and also the first Muslim American woman in Congress, one of the first. So that brings me great joy. I'll go to, let's see, hang on, who have I? Taylor, that's the next person on my screen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Taylor. I'm not 100% sure what we're saying for these intros, but I currently live in Nepal in a village on the border of India, and I've been here for about 2.5 years. I am originally from the States, and I'm really excited. Are we talking about something that brings us joy?
Yes, something that brings you joy.
So I'm in the middle of painting a mural here in the village that's going to raise awareness about plastic pollution. And I have 3 friends who are visiting me in my little home, which is so nice because rarely people actually come visit you when you live this far away. So yeah, we're working with 150 school kids to make this mural happen this week, and we just built bamboo scaffolds that are about 40 feet high. So tomorrow's the first day that I'm going to climb these scaffolds, and yeah, so I'm excited. Thank you.
So now you get to say who goes next.
Has someone not gone? You want to raise your hand? Therese?
I hope you can hear me. Yes, I should be unmuted. Hi, I'm Therese. I'm pretty excited, I have to say, because it's my first live call. And so it's so great to see you all. I'm originally from Austria, but right now I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, till actually the end of this module. And what brought me joy, I think there are a lot of things that bring me joy, but particularly everything seems to be related as well with this Gaia module, because for me it just seems to arrive at the perfect time, and it's just so empowering to read the course material, but also to read up what you're thinking and writing about, and just really makes my day very often. So thanks a lot to all of you. What about, let's see, Adelaide? Please correct me in case I pronounced your.
Oh, hi, can you hear me? Oh, great. It's in French it's Adélaïde, but everyone calls me Ade. Ade is fine. Hi, everyone. So I'm Ade from France. I'm excited to meet you all finally, because the first live call, I couldn't turn on the video. The second one, I was traveling, so finally made it here. About something that brings me joy, I was lucky enough to attend a nonviolent communication course for 2 days last weekend. So it was just a small group, just 12 of us, and I'm grateful for like the safe space we had for those 2 days to just be able to share freely and learn a lot of tools to be able to listen more empathically. And I feel like I left the course with so much joy, with a lot of energy. Weirdly enough, like I thought I would be really tired after, like looking at deep emotions and everything, and actually I was really energized by being around all this kindness and empathy. So I'm still very happy now, actually. So then how about Nadia?
Hello, I'm Nadia, and I'm currently in Bristol in England. So we have a lot of stray cat problems in the neighborhood, and one neighbor decided to capture all the cats without informing anyone else, and she only told us once she's done it, which is good because she dealt with the problem, except that one of the stray cat I was trying to tame to find a family to adopt it over the last few months. So I was a bit upset that this cat would have been taken with a lot of the more wild one. And what brought me joy is to actually find out that this cat, for some reason, she didn't manage to capture it, so it's still here. And that made my day. And I just want to say I've noticed Laura's got her cat joining our conversation. So hello to the cat. And I'm going to pass on to someone who didn't yet, Daria, I think.
Hi everyone. I thought I couldn't talk and I couldn't. You couldn't.
Daria, we're having trouble hearing your
I'm
sound. Can you make it any louder?
That's as much as I can do.
Okay.
I don't
That
have
works.
headphones, and I'm not at home. Is that better? Yeah. I shared something. I typed something because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to talk to you because I'm in a but I got up early today because I knew I was leaving for work for 2 days, and I had this bucket of kale transplants that a friend gave me that had no soil, so I managed to get them all in the ground before the sun rose today. And now I'm waiting for my ferry to take me to Vancouver. So the plants are going to be fine in the ground for the next 2 days, and it's supposed to be raining a little bit, so that will be perfect. That made my day.
Thank you, Daria. Yes, I see your chat now. And who would you like to call on next? Dominic, welcome. We're just saying hello and sharing something that brought us joy in the past week.
How about Dominic, if he's still there?
Dominic, I've just unmuted you so that you can share. Would you like to say hello and share something that brought you joy in the past week?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Dominic. I'm in Rio in Brazil.
And we can't see you. If you'd like to share your video, you're welcome to. If you don't want to, you're welcome to not share it.
Thanks. I think probably the connection wouldn't be strong enough for that to work. I think something that brought me joy was seeing that there is a new egg in the nest outside my windowsill, and a very calm and persistent mum is sitting on that egg. And there's something very reassuring and strengthening about watching her single-minded focus on creating this environment for life to grow and hatch. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And the culture that we've set in place here is that whoever has just spoken gets to choose who goes next. So how about everyone raise your hand if you have not shared yet? So Dominic, you get to pick.
So I can't see anything, but what I'll say is I'll choose the person whose name begins with F, or the closest to someone who has a name, first name beginning with F.
Ingrid, I think that's you.
Yeah, that's me, I think. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Ingrid from Norway. It was really difficult to find something. It's not that I live a very depressing life, but it's been a bit chaotic in the village. So what I really want to share is that made me happy today is that I actually had a very good talk with my closest neighbors. That was really nice. It's long since I've seen them, and that made me happy. That's it.
And that leaves Nisami.
Thank you, Gio. Well, it's been a lot of, I'm here in the UK, in the southeast, in Sussex, and there's been a lot of disturbance in the force here in the UK with Brexit and other things going through. A lot of, I guess the general climate is one of a lot of uncertainty, whether we're looking at house prices or, you know, are there going to be, is there going to be food, vegetables from France and Spain still on the shelves come the spring, that kind of stuff. And in my personal case, yeah, there's been a lot going on. So I spent, I think, about the last 2 weeks almost solidly sat in this chair and kind of was getting really under it. And then I kind of decided to, I made a decision that I'd been putting off for a long time, which was I was going to sort of get back in the gym. It sounds really, you know, kind of banal and boring, but I thought, yeah, I'm going to do this. My lucky number is 13, and so I was really intrigued by the shoes that I ended up getting in the shop, where they were called New Balance, which is the brand. So I thought, okay, that's kind of significant. And the model number was 373, which added up to 13. So I thought, okay, this is a good sign. Then I went to the gym. I'd never been there before, and went into the changing room, and there was one locker open as if it was waiting for me, and that was locker number 103, which is kind of 13 as well. So it was good, and I kind of picked myself up out of a bit of a just kind of feeling of being under it. So yeah, it's good to be back. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. All right, so good to have everyone present. I'll share one thing that brought me joy just this morning. We had one of our cats died last year, and our daughter chose a new kitten who's now about a teenager, almost full-grown cat. And I was rereading module 3 this morning, and she was on my lap trying to get comfortable, and I zipped her inside of my sweater, and she just snuggled inside of my sweater with her little face up outside of the zipper and just went fast asleep with her chin resting on the zipper. And it was just a total delight to have her snuggling in and sleeping there like that, just comfortable and warm. Loved it. All right, so as usual, I wanted to make a space now to answer any questions you might have had with questions that might have come up with module 3 or with the course in general. And they can be about the content of the course, or about your interfacing with the online platform, or about something else that someone brought up in one of the forums, any interesting points that people shared, or reflections. So not just questions for me and Geo necessarily, but just to invite dialogue about the content and practice that we've been engaging in here. So go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question or comment, and we'll get rolling. Go ahead, Nadia.
I actually have a few questions, but I'll start with one and then see if other people have nothing to say. I'll go with the next one. The first one is just about, I've only read module 3 yesterday, so I still can't really comment much about it. But a couple of people already posted their personal or group work or something, and for some reason I wasn't able to reply to them. So I noticed that they're in Alison's group and I'm in Deborah's group, and I'm just wondering, is that the reason I can't reply to them, or is there a problem with the platform?
Do you mean in the forum you can't reply?
In module 3, there is group work activity and there is individual work activity, and a couple of people posted something today or yesterday, I don't know, and I tried to reply to it about an hour ago, and I couldn't. There was no reply button I could press.
Oh.
Is that not meant to be? Because they're not in my group, so I thought maybe I'm not supposed to reply to them.
No, you can reply to everyone on the platform. The groups are just to share the work the way that Deborah and I share the exchange with all of you. But you should be able to reply to everyone equally. Giovanni, do you know what that might be about?
I will look into it. As far as I know, you should be able to reply, but I will contact our technical support to check into that, Nadia. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else have questions? If not, it sounds like Nadia has a couple more.
Okay, then I'll go ahead. It's actually a question for you, Alison, but feel free not to answer if this is not appropriate. So you have explained yourself, and I think Gio and Deborah as well are going through a grieving period. And in one of your messages, you were explaining that you have your own way of coping. Would you mind expressing it very quickly? What is a coping mechanism?
Wow.
Well, you don't have to answer. This is just a question.
Yeah, my coping mechanism for this. Let me just think for a second. Well, I found out that in many ways, I have more support than I thought. That's one thing that happened. There were a couple of areas where I kind of looked for support where it wasn't forthcoming, and I was surprised, and that was really hard. And I started to feel some despair, like I didn't have enough to get through, enough support. And then I sort of just began collapsing and discovered sources of support that I hadn't known about, people who aren't near me physically, or people who just sort of showed up and said, what can I do? What do you need? Do you want a hug? Can I make you dinner? Can I take your daughter for the weekend? So that was great. I also just sort of allowed myself to accept support more than I normally do. It's hard for me to admit I need support. That's a barrier for me. And so I had to do some inner work to say, yeah, okay, I'll take you up on that now when people offered things, or even to reach out and ask for it when I was afraid that I might hear no. And so I got better at hearing no, and I got better at finding the resources to see other people's no as their way of taking care of something important to them. And that allowed me to say no more, like when I realized, oh, when he says no, he's not there for me now, he's taking care of something important to him. That's good. I'm glad he's doing that. And when I came to understand that in my heart, that gave me more freedom to say no to others, because I could recognize in myself what I was needing to say yes to, in saying no to taking on some new responsibility. So one thing I did was I turned down some work that I was going to do in May this year when I was really hitting a low point. I just wrote to the people I was going to be working with 1,000 miles away. I was going to travel and work with them. And I wrote and said, I don't think I would be of much use to you right now. And they completely understood and even offered me some support I hadn't expected. The normal forms of support that did show up are my women's circle, which is weekly and 2 hours long. About 8 of us just sharing how we're doing and then doing some work together. That was really helpful, as well as just going for walks in nature. That's been super important to me, just to spend time alone outside. I also have a buddy that I meet with every week to do co-counseling, also called reevaluation counseling. There was a link to that in Module 3, and that's been a practice of mine for a number of years now. That's really important support for me, as well as getting enough good food to eat, enough good water to drink, exercise, all the ways that I know I need to take care of myself. I just needed to really double down on those things. And then finally, I, for some reason, signed up for a year-long program called Earthkeeper Wisdom School. And it just so happened that the first weekend was focused on gratitude, and I was just having a grief weekend. I was not in gratitude. I just needed to cry a lot and just fall apart a lot. And so I did. I was like, I'm not doing gratitude, everybody. I'm doing grief this weekend. Sorry. And they were really glad that I did. And then the second weekend was all about grief, actually. And it was 3 months ago, and the whole weekend involved 2 grief rituals that have been developed to support those grieving anything in their lives, to do so in the company of others. And I can share more about that process maybe in the forum if you're interested. So that's maybe a medium length answer to a very big question. Hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you, Alison. Thanks for sharing this very private emotions and experience. If you don't mind, I would like you to add about that workshop so I can read about it. I just asked the question because I felt your input in the forum was rather positive and encouraging despite what you're going through, and you were definitely acting as a facilitator, but we are all human on this course, and I thought You deserve to have a voice, and the others too. I mean, you and Deborah as well. I just asked you the question because you're asking for people to ask questions.
Yeah, thanks for seeing that. And one thing I've noticed, and I remembered this when I read the section on eldering. I reread the whole program every year along with you all, and when I reread the section on eldering at the very end of Module 3, there was a sentence about seasoning, becoming seasoned by life experiences. And I loved that word, seasoning, like food, you know, how we season something so it's really delicious and delightful and succulent. And I realized that the experience of this year was seasoning me in some way that I couldn't understand, but I could feel that it was bringing me some kind of greater presence, just like being willing to be present to whatever experience people are having. Yeah, just accepting my own process, I think, brought me that. So go ahead and let life season you, y'all. Tough as it may be. Thanks for that invitation, Nadia. Whew, any other questions? Nizami?
Yeah, thank you for that sharing. Yeah, I've been looking at this, the textbook, this one, Beyond You and Me, and I've got as far as, what's her name, Diana Leaf Christian, where she really goes, really emphasizes the pitfalls of trying to do consensus, and she says, without having been professionally trained in it, or, you know. So do you want to say something a little bit more about that? I mean, she mentions this word pseudo consensus, and I guess I'm kind of, it feels like there's a lot that maybe a lot behind this, and maybe you have some personal experiences or community experiences, or if anybody does, it'd be interesting to see, because maybe it's simply the warnings about using consensus, or that it seems like the, you know, the innocent or naive default option, whereas it can be, you know, really drawn out and painful, I guess. So maybe a bit of, you know, okay, if anybody has examples of where it worked and where it didn't work.
I'm not sure what you're asking exactly. When consensus works best and when it doesn't? I mean,
I was hoping for if you had a personal anecdote or experience, or if anybody did, if not you, Alison, of like some, you know, really juicy examples of, yeah, okay, this is where we tried consensus maybe by default, and this is what happened. That'd be useful to hear, because she really, you know, she really makes a big noise about, you know, what's this, starting a new eco-village, structural conflict and 9 ways to resolve it. And, you know, this not misusing consensus seems to be a big one.
Yeah, I know her fairly well, and she really has not enjoyed her home community's use of consensus at all. She lives at Earth Haven Eco Village in North Carolina, and they've switched to sort of a different method of making decisions, a different decision rule. So they still use the consensus process and sort of consensus culture, but their decision rule is a bit different. They don't look for a full yes from everyone in the room necessarily anymore. And I think that a lot of what hasn't worked for her is how often consensus, since it invites everyone's full presence and everyone's full truth, we bring everything that we come from, you know, we bring all of our stucknesses and all of our fragility and all of our learned tendencies to embody what society has tried to teach us to be in our roles in the society. And so it can be tricky. It can definitely bring stuff up. And yeah, I'm a fan of trying things out and really having a very experimental attitude towards life, and then learning from that. In fact, Dominic, if you don't mind, I'm going to invoke you here, because something you said once has really stuck with me. about how helpful it can be or how supportive it can be to create conditions where we can make the maximum number of educational mistakes. Did I get it right, Dominic? Oh, he's muted.
You can quote me as much as you like, and then I'll deny everything later.
Great, thanks. So I love creating those kind of conditions where I can make educational mistakes with a minimum of harm. And so I think consensus allows us to do that as long as we set up a culture of consensus to begin with. And maybe that's what she's talking about, Diana Leaf Christian, is that need to create a consensus culture to begin with, where we're really listening deeply to each other, where we're really open to be transformed by what we hear from them, to have our life changed by what we hear. If we're not doing that, if we're listening in order to figure out how to subdue the other person or how to win the argument, then we're not going to have a consensus culture, and our consensus is not going to really succeed in having everyone feel heard and included. Does that address what you were wondering?
Yes, kind of. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. Fan Lin looks like she might have something to add as well. Dominic, were you trying to say something too?
Yeah, just listening to Diana talking about how consensus can be sometimes used to try and avoid conflict, and also to try and get other needs met, like mattering and participation and visibility, I think was part of what led increasing numbers of people to question if there were other ways to do things which were as inclusive, but that didn't make decision making dependent on everybody being okay within themselves. So there are definite limits, I think, that some people have discovered in some communities to the way that consensus functions, and that they can develop other strategies for taking care of everybody's well-being that don't involve needing to hijack decision-making processes in order to process everything else.
Okay, if I can, I mean, it sounds like this warning about consensus is what you'd call kind of death by committee and things like that, where it just takes, you never get anybody to agree. And yet we had, I think, somewhere back maybe it was in the start of module 2, I can't remember which. It was some kind of indigenous community, maybe the Hopi or maybe it was the Quakers, I can't remember now, where they said, okay, this is how we make decisions. We just get round the fire and we keep going until there is an agreement.
Yeah, I recently was working with some students. Oh, I see you, Fanlin. I'll make my comment briefly. And we were talking about how frequently groups fall into a pattern of just sitting in one big group and talking things through and attempting to make decisions that way without any other way, any other format for exploring all the different kinds of information people bring: emotional intelligence and kinesthetic intelligence, visual intelligence. And so we talked about a couple of dozen different formats that can be used to tap into all of the different kinds of wisdom. And one of them that I love comes from my friend Tree Bresson. She calls it chaos. Just hang out, see what happens. And in Russia, they say almost everything at a conference that's of any use happens in the hallways. And Lynn, looks like you'd like to share something.
I actually have a question. Hopefully, get the feedback from the group. Is that like how when you work on the personal required work with reflection on the element in the module, like what's your experience? So because my experience that when reading the course materials, I find a lot of gems like throughout the test, like a lot of things that update my previous idea or simply fill in a blank in my knowledge or experience. But then, so when you reflect on all this element, like how do you come up with a like coherent like point? Like what's your experience when reflecting on the module? I think the main goal is to how do you bring your like understanding, your learning to a deeper level.
So who'd like to respond to that juicy invitation? Ade?
Can you guys hear me? Hang on. Oh yeah. I'm not sure I have the best answer, but I can relate a little bit to what you're saying, Fan. And I found like what was been helpful for me was to write down all those gems, like you're calling them, all the ideas that stuck with me, and I read them all down, and I tried to see if some things sort of match together. And often I end up with like 2 or 3 like sort of big themes or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I found that trying to like sort of find a theme or 2 to start with doesn't work for me. I have to like write everything down, things that I want to reflect on or I'm going to talk about. And after that, something emerges. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you, Ade. That makes a lot of sense. Glad to know that you also take note.
Yeah, definitely. I actually have a question, if that's okay for me to go now.
Sure.
Cool. For the second module, I found myself really overwhelmed at some point with the amount of information, because it was bigger than the first one, and also it had a lot of information that like I really knew nothing about, and I sort of got tricked, because the first part was about nonviolent communication, and I know quite a lot about it already. So I don't know if it's like I lowered my guard or something, but I was like, oh, that's fine, I know this, I'm comfortable. And all of a sudden, here are all those terms around like participatory democracy, sociocracy, holacracy, all of that. I just got really overwhelmed. And I wonder if some of you guys often have this sort of freezing of the brain when facing difficult information. Like I have this limiting belief of, or like it's too intellectual for me, I can't understand, it's too complicated, I can't do it. And it takes me a long time to get over it and sort of push through to, you know, I manage to understand eventually. But I have this first like wall that comes up facing really new ideas. So I was wondering if you had this experience as well.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding. Fanlin, I saw your hand go up. Would you like to comment?
Yes, so I have very similar experience to yours, Ade. I also take note while when I was reading the PDF. So to digest the module 2, I have to read the note like up and down, like many times. Still, I feel that it's hard to just condense the different part of module 2 into a single theme. There seems to me like 2 or 3 themes there. And at one point, I was also clearly aware that, yeah, this is, I mean, this course in general takes some academic stamina to study. Sometimes it's the amount of information, or sometimes it's just that the content itself probably requires to use not only like our intelligence, but also it needs us to put in other things such as the feeling, experience. So when you feel that the amount of information is overwhelming, I think that maybe that's the point that we can take a break and then let those things just like mix at the back of our mind.
Yeah, thanks. I know that Module 2 is really huge, and we've actually spoken about dividing it up. As you mentioned, Funlin, it does cover a number of different subjects that are related, obviously, but we are thinking about dividing it up so that the later modules are a bit longer and Module 2 is a bit shorter, because Module 2 is quite dense and is really the heart of everything. So yeah, it's not surprising that so many of you raised your hands there. Nadia, I want to give you a chance to comment, and then just to note, we have about 10 or 15 minutes more, and I'd like to invite Dominic to share a bit in a minute before we have to go. So so Nadia, go ahead first.
Yes, it's just in response to what Ade and Fan said. I find the way the course is structured is quite different to a typical academic course. So normally, I mean, as far as I remember from taking classes before, I would focus on learning the content, and I would also face difficulties with whatever is more intellectually challenging. What I found in this course is more, maybe because we're engaged in forums, or maybe because it's a voluntary course, I don't really know, or maybe it's just how you guys have managed to structure the course, I don't know. But I think what's great is the parts that I found more difficult to engage with are not necessarily the hardest one to understand, but the ones I don't personally relate to. So let's say communication is something I assume most people relate to in their personal life. Some people maybe not. Whereas engaging into consensus making or democracy or everything, maybe some of us haven't made it. So it might not be that this topic is more difficult to understand, and probably I would argue it might actually be easier because it's more theoretical, whereas the other one is more personal. I think we just don't necessarily relate to it, so we find it a bit harder to assimilate everything. I mean, that's how I felt, at least.
It makes a lot of sense to me, actually. I've never seen it this way, but yeah, I understand. It does make sense. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks for that, for those insights. I think it's absolutely true that we often gravitate towards that which we are most passionate about learning. And so I hope that you all will notice where that passion and that curiosity comes from in yourself, and follow those links when you are interested in them, and feel free to ignore the parts that don't speak to you or set them aside for later. You will have time to look at the past modules throughout the rest of the course and into January. So if something is just too big to digest at the moment, but you want to come back to it, feel free to do that. Just set it aside, make a note, and you can come back to it even after the course closes for a couple of weeks. Well, I wanted to comment on something in the module that I always enjoy hearing again, which is the Martin Luther King Jr.'s short snippet that's in there, the little video where he's talking about power and love. And I wrote it down just to remember. So first he says that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. And then he says, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And that was Martin Luther King Jr. speaking in the United States a few years back, but it seems so relevant every time I hear it, when I'm thinking about the news coming in from around the world and the so-called leadership that doesn't seem to be embodying that kind of power. And what we're learning in the course can sometimes feel like, how can we embody this when we're looking at people in positions of structural power who are not looking at it that way? And Dominic, I was thinking of you being on this call and wondered if you could speak to that at all.
I can try. Thank you. This is so interesting for me to be here because I've been teaching on this course for 13 years, but never online. only ever in a room with people. So the way you're doing things is really fascinating for me. It's completely different. If it hadn't got the same name, I wouldn't recognize that it was the same thing. That's really fascinating. Well, every time I hear a quote from someone like King, I like to remember that in our effort to attribute accurately where the words that inspire us come from, we give to that quote the name of the person who said that, which makes a lot of sense. But when we do that, we forget that he wasn't a human being on his own, sat in his room thinking up profound things, but he was part of a network of churches that were actively engaged in transforming an entire country and refounding a sense of what it means to be a group of people politically connected to each other. So in that sense, very similar to the work that we do when we found an intentional community. So I like to remember that the words that he spoke happen within this context of solidarity and support and nurturing, which to me is quite related to Alison, what you were saying when you were responding to the question about how you've been dealing with grief, is finding these networks of support that enable us to look truthfully at the situation that we're in. And so what I hear Martin Luther King Jr. doing in that quote is looking very, very deeply and truthfully at the way in which justice and injustice functions, and refounding our understanding of what that means, so that we're not looking at laws and statutes anymore, but we're looking at action that all of us can take to undo the blocks towards the functioning of love, as he describes it. When this course happens in person, as it has done in Brazil all the years that I've been involved, rather than online, there are certain people who tend to be the resource folk for certain subjects. And one of the people who often comes up in the very first weeks of the first module is May East, a Brazilian woman who has lived for many decades in the Findhorn community in Scotland, and a friend of mine. And one of the things that May often shares at the beginning of these modules is that 9 out of 10 of the projects and groups that come together to do this essential planet-saving work of creating an ecological foundation for our future, 9 out of 10 of these groups split up and their projects end within 1 year after beginning. And the principal reason that this happens is because these groups discover conflict naturally, in my view, because they're doing something which is important. So obviously conflict would occur because what they're doing is worthwhile. Conflict always happens when the relationships are worthwhile or where the subject is important. We never fight with people we don't care about. We never fight about subjects that aren't important to us. So 9 out of 10 of these projects end because conflict appears and people have not reviewed their understanding of what conflict is, what it serves, and how it functions. So if you had a childhood similar to mine, an upbringing similar to mine, went to a school like mine, or had a family like mine, or had jobs like mine, then you were taught that conflict is dangerous and that well-being is synonymous with an absence of conflict. And what I found in my work is that quite the opposite is true. In fact, that conflict is a function of relationships which are worthwhile, which are meaningful, and work which is meaningful. But if we believe that conflict is dangerous, frightening, scary, a criticism of us, or an indication of the other person's fault, then when we meet conflict, we close down and we withdraw, and we move away from the people who we're in relationship with. And it's that moving away that causes those projects to wither and die, or to explode in dramatic ways and end. So understanding conflict and embracing conflict as an essential aspect of meaningful relationships ends up being a key aspect of creating projects and communities that are not just ecologically sustainable, but that are humanly sustainable too. So in relation to that, what I would recommend is that people, are you still there? Can you still hear me? Yep. Is that people quite consciously decide to take ownership of the justice systems which grow up around meaningful relationships and worthwhile transformative engagement with society. And there are many ways you can do that. The first thing, in my understanding, is to create these systems of support, these relationships where, again, as Alison said, not just is someone willing to come round and cook supper sometimes or spend the weekend with your kids so that you can have some downtime, but very, very specifically that they're willing to offer you the kind of presence and listening that enables you to maintain your humanity and the humanity of those you're working with or struggling against or in interaction with in any challenging way. From the basis of having adequate support, then it can be very useful to look at what justice would look like, both within yourself, in your relationships, and on a systemic or collective or political level. I personally have found that nonviolent communication is the most effective way of doing that inner work, the relationship work, and the social transformation work. But obviously it's only effective if it makes sense to you, if it's meaningful for you. It's not a technique. It's not, despite the way it's often presented, it's not skills-based. It's not about learning and accumulating tricks or abilities, but much more about a willingness to see ourselves as being always impacted within ourselves in relationship and on the political or social scale, and engaging in dialogue with all three of those different scales as one movement. So whether it's through the suggestions, the investigation, the research that nonviolent communication invites us to do, or through any other means of understanding ourselves and understanding other people, it can be really, really useful to start thinking consciously about what a justice system might look like, or a conflict resolution process might look like. And the process that me and my colleagues have been developing in Brazil over the last 20 years is called restorative circles. And it suggests forming a systemic agreement amongst the people who I'm working with that allows us to think consciously about what kind of response to conflict we would like to have when that conflict becomes painful or even violent. What do we want to do? Do we have any agreements as a community that we want to do, that we want to keep? So making those agreements allows us to create a basis of security and certainty within our relationships, that when something painful happens and we need support, that the community is committed to offering that support. And what we found makes that support most effective is having a series of procedures that enable people who are suffering the results of conflict to come closer together. Because the habits, at least the cultural habits that I learned growing up, suggest that when conflict happens, because it's dangerous, you should move further away from the other person who you have a tense moment with. So what does that mean in practice, moving towards the other person? Well, or moving towards the conflict itself? Well, what it often means is having the support necessary to be able to dialogue. And dialogue is one of those words that we use in everyday language. We use it as a synonym for a conversation. And by doing so, we lose perhaps its technical meaning, its craft meaning. If dialogue was a word that you needed in order to be able to do your work in the world, like gardening or working with wood or with dance or with cleaning or with music, playing music or any other craft-based learning, then you'd have to have a technical, precise understanding of what it means. So restorative circles invites us to have that very clear technical understanding about what the word dialogue means. And the version I like best is the one that comes from Martin Buber, who is perhaps the first person to study dialogue academically as a subject in itself. And he said, dialogue is a conversation between equals whose ending is unknown. So what I love about dialogue is it's not instruction, it's not guiding someone. It's a conversation that will reach its ending only when we all agree, when we all discover that that's where we want to be for now. And what that looks like in a restorative circle is usually some kind of action that repairs harm, restores relationship, and reintegrates everybody in their coexistence. Not almost always in new forms that take account of whatever the circumstances were that led that conflict to become painful, so that we're restorative in the sense of moving forward, learning from what happened, and becoming upright again. We're not restorative like we restore an old house to put it back in the state it was in when it was originally built, but restorative in the sense of learning something new. So however it is that you respond to conflict, I invite you to think about it as a subject, rather like in permaculture, where all the things we produce have a use and a function. Well, think about how relationships tend to produce conflict and differences of opinion and disagreements and misunderstandings. And if that's the case, then what is it that we can do to make good use of this fuel that conflict provides to strengthen our relationships and to deepen intimacy between us all?
Great. Thank you so much for those insights, Dominic. And I love what you said about how when we can offer the support for those dialogues to happen, that tends to decrease the perceived danger of getting into that dialogue. And I've really noticed that in my own family. Whenever we have a friend here to help my partner and me hear each other, it goes so much better. We can hear each other better because we have that support. And I was working with a community in a different state last weekend, and they were just paralyzed in their approach to conflict. There was a lot of fear of approaching it, and everyone just wanted to avoid it. And they had in place a system of trainings, but no one was going to the trainings. The trainings were about listening. And the conflict transformation team had instituted a series of trainings for people to practice listening so that they could then support those in conflict. But people weren't coming. And I discovered in my weekend with them that this perception that you needed a lot of training in order to listen to each other and support each other in conflict was getting in the way because people didn't believe they'd be able to support each other in conflict. They thought it would be a really dangerous place to be. And so we did a couple of practice scenarios that involved very simple dialogues, basically reflective listening. And afterwards I asked, raise your hands if you think that you could do what Stephen just did or what I just did, which was basically say, what do you want this person to hear? And then asking, what did you get from that? And was that it? Was that what you wanted heard? And 80% of the hands in the room went up. There's no training. There was no expectation of some extreme amount of skill. And one person said, I can really see how thinking that you have to have a skill would get in the way of being able to offer that support. I said, yes, you get it.
Yeah, and I developed those 3 questions with a group of 7 or 8-year-olds sat on the corner. It wasn't, it wasn't study. It was slow for us because we didn't know what we were doing, so it took ages. But once we got them and realized they worked, that's just it. Then it's out there, and that's, I find, very, very liberating when we don't mix together what works with the idea of knowledge that we need to kind of cram and study. So I'm delighted that 80% of people said they could do it, and I'm not surprised. I agree with them. I think that they could too.
Yeah.
The only question is, what kind of support do they need in order to be able to do something so counterculturally odd. You know, it's just not how most of us were brought up to think and behave.
Right. So that's the question I left them with was, you know, if you would like to offer this, think about what support you would need in order to do that, whether it's inspiration or company or some things to read, and figure out how to put those in place. Yeah, so wonderful. This is fascinating. We've had a couple of people that needed to go. I understand if people want to just tap out. We're at about our hour, but I wanted to offer the opportunity to ask any questions of Dominic that you might have, if you have any more time, Dom.
Yep. Please go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dominic will probably roll his eyes at this, but at the moment anyway, Brazil is kind of almost synonymous with the other B word, Bolsonaro. So who's definitely, you know, creating or shouting about a lot of very kind of contentious issues, you know, cutting down the Amazon and so on. And it seems like it's just all-out war on indigenous people at the minute. So I mean, I'm interesting to hear what what your take on that is, or the news on the ground over there.
It's tough. It's been very shocking. We've been doubling down on what I call support systems. So kind of the micro political level of networks of solidarity and empathy. Especially with trans people, just like checking in several times a day to make sure they're okay, because lots of depression, suicide attempts. There are lists going around with names of the people who should be attacked. WhatsApp groups are kind of processing those names. So on Monday morning, I sat with several people who were on those lists, worried about their physical safety and well-being. Most of the gay couples I know, they're not holding hands in the street anymore, not holding hands on public transport. People are changing their hairstyles, changing their clothes. And the government hasn't even come in yet. This is just the kind of the wave of popular revolt, hate and pain mixed together that is leading people to commit these acts of violence and paint swastikas on the churches nearby where I live and stuff like that. And personally, I'm looking at 14 years of work, which we've been doing with the government, with the Justice Ministry and the state education departments, which is very likely to be not just stopped, but probably kind of wiped out. So there's no trace that we were even there. So it's a time of very, very big change. And for my question is always, how do cultures of resistance survive? And there are very, very clear indices of the things that cultures of resistance that haven't been wiped out tend to do. One of the things that they do is that they are rigorous in taking care of themselves. It's not self-care as we understand it these days, a kind of individual, reserved, privatized sense of peace and well-being, despite the fact that the world around us is on fire. It's self-care as a community act. So really, really doubling down on that. Cultures of resistance also continue to celebrate. They don't stop celebrating. I noticed that we began our call in that way, by going around and hearing from each person things that people are happy about, that have inspired them, that have touched them in the last week. And I think that is an essential practice in keeping us strong. And cultures of resistance do not internalize the mechanisms of oppression that are being implemented around them. So I would say that the way that we respond to painful conflict in our communities is a key aspect of how we maintain our identities. I think setting up our own economic systems so that we're not constantly being motivated by demands that come from an economic system which is not aligned with our values is another key piece. Creating school systems that are the same, creating spaces of sanctuary for those of us who are currently unable to deal with the pressures, so that we process our own mental pressures and psychic unwellness. as much as we can do to take care of ourselves internally. And I think really this is relevant everywhere in the world at the moment, but obviously we're going to have a very stark lesson in seeing the extent to which we can do that over the coming months with what's happening here in Brazil.
Yeah, thanks. Let's figure out how to do that even better, extravagantly, take care of ourselves and our movements, just delightfully, deliciously, deeply, to season ourselves through this, you know? Other questions for Dominic before we close?
Well, just to say a very quick thank you to Dominic, and wishing him and his communities over there the best of luck, and also that I hope they do feel supported by, you know, there's been huge news media coverage about this, so there's a lot of us tuning in and beaming support. So yeah, thank you.
That's very good to hear. And I want to say that just by doing what you're doing, and you know, dedicating the time that you're dedicating to learning this material, and doing everything that this course involves, that for me is very, very concrete support, because we're seeding viable alternatives on the local level wherever we are, and that's immensely powerful.
Hear, hear. Therese, were you unmuting yourself there? Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. This has been a really, really delightful hour for me, and very supportive just to have all of your company on this journey. A lot of tough times that people are facing all over the world right now. And it's good that we're doing what we're doing where we are and staying connected to each other when that's supportive. So I want to acknowledge that most of us on the call today are not native English speakers, and just want to invite everybody to unmute themselves and just say something in a language they love, that they love the sound of. It could be goodbye, see you next time, could be good morning, whatever you want to say in your native tongue or a tongue that you love to speak. And then when everyone's done, then we'll close the call and see you on the forums.
Arigatou gozaimashita.
Merci pour tout, à bientôt.
Muito obrigada.
Ha det bra.
坚持, that means be persistent.
Ciao, grazie a tutti.
Forza sempre.
Я люблю тебя. До свидания. Okay, I think that's everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now. Bye. See you next time.
Bye. Thank you.